Time No podcast. The three gates: body, energy, mind. We simultaneously live in a physical body and operate in an energy field on a mental plane. These are known as the three gates. It's easy to understand when we try to consider the following. If we were sick on our dying bed in the hospital and the doctor came in and offered us a new body, most of the time we'd accept. So we'd know that we are not just our physical body. When we run out of steam, we look for ways to get more with a coffee, other stimulants, food, rest, and excitement. If we were losing our minds in 5-point restraints face down on a gurney and the psychiatrist came up and said, "Hey, we can inject a nanobot," tiny microcomputer, See the Singularity is Near by Ray Kurzweil, right now, and replace your broken mind with a fresh one, we might likely say yes to that. His Holiness Dalai Lama discusses this idea in the Middle Way, Faith Grounded in Reason, with Geshe Thupten Jinpa. We exist at the same moment in all of these, but our awareness is normally limited to one at a time. We might at one point feel physically fine, but emotionally ill. There are so many dimensions within the levels of body, energy, and mind, but the point is clear that we aren't aware of all of them, and we can develop everything at the same time, at the same rate, and on the same levels. Our meditation can help us get in touch with these parts of ourselves. Many of these ways of being in the world can be explained by the concept of archetypes. I use the terms aspect, archetype, and voice interchangeably. Archetypes, energy patterns, are what the medical intuitive Carolyn Mace calls templates, through which our energy is projected. The simple act of being aware of these aspects gives us power. Instead of being blindly driven, we awaken to the desires, motivations, habits, benefits, drawbacks, and skills of an individual aspect, as if it were another person. It's not another person, it's a part of us, but to make the mental and energetic shift into awareness, we can use the first-person voice. Shadow aspects, when we're unaware of a part of us, or have pushed it aside, judged, or disowned it. The term shadow doesn't always mean something negative. These are parts of us that aren't out in broad daylight. We can become familiar with these, which helps us become integrated and feel whole, rather than conflicted and fragmented. If we deny part of ourselves, that part can still influence our feelings, thoughts, and decisions indirectly. Shadow work in psychology is when we deal with unpleasant, disowned, rejected, and disconnected parts of ourselves. In the aspects of self-dialogues, we speak in the first person as the voice of that particular archetype. This allows that aspect to communicate with the rest of us, thus relieving pressure. It doesn't mean that we let a negative side of us take over. In fact, it works opposite to that. If we don't acknowledge the shadow aspects, they may have subversive power in that they leak or speak to us in unhealthy ways because we've denied them. Well, like I said, long time no podcast. I think it's 3 years, and I apologize to you for that. I've had many requests to continue the podcasts over the years, and honestly, it's just been a lot of work to produce a podcast on my little home studio. And recently, I was just kind of lazy about it, honestly. But I really enjoyed doing the podcasts, and I really enjoy the responses that I get from them. So I have this new book out, The Power of Vow, Everyday Tools for Healing, from which I just read a little section. And I thought, well, let's see if there's a way to do podcasts which don't involve so much labor, right? So I just happened to get an email from the podcast host where they said, guess what, you can do the whole thing on your iPhone. I thought, what? Forget it. I'm definitely looking into that. So this is my first one, and I'm not sure how the quality is going to be, honestly, because I'm more inclined to use the pro gear. But the thing about this is I can do a podcast from anywhere, anytime, and upload it directly to the podcast site. So if I have a thought somewhere sometime, or something occurs to me, or I can run across an interview or an interesting conversation with somebody, I can blast out a podcast and it's live immediately within a few moments of uploading it. So I think that's got a lot of potential and I'm excited about it. So I'm hoping that it sounds good, and you can let me know. You can always send me an email, Darren@the12stepbuddhist.com. So let's just talk a little bit about the shadow work and esoterics and what it kind of means. And, hopefully it'll shed a little bit of light on that if you have not been involved in shadow work. So the most recent example that I have of that is understanding something from yoga. And I've been a yoga teacher now since 2011 and really enamored with the entire process of teaching and practicing yoga. It really works well with my recovery and with my Buddhist practice, meditation especially. So there's this idea, and I'm trying to remember the exact source. I read it in Esoterics. Oh yeah, it's a text by Dr. Is it Motomayo? I can look it up, but it's a text about using the chakras, right, and their relationship to Chinese medicine. It's one of these mind-blower, innovative books. He was one of the guys who really started bringing this out into the mainstream. So, along with Anadea Judith and so forth. So, at any rate, the point I'm making is that the exoteric, right, is the obvious, and the esoteric is the unconscious, or the less obvious, let's just say the subconscious, the beneath the surface. Okay, so the shadow is beneath. The shadow is like, beneath the surface, right? So the analogy is a tree, right? So you have the branches, which is great for yoga because we talk about the 8 limbs of yoga, with the asanas, pranayamas, and samadhi states, and ethics, and so forth. Well, that's the stuff we see. And the roots of the tree are beneath the surface of the earth, obviously. And what's happening there? We've got the sort of the origin or the source, or at least a deeper aspect of the full tree, right? Maybe the origin is something else, like beyond what we can talk about, something like nature or God or who knows, right? But this idea of esoterics, right, being beneath the surface, is very interesting to me, and the shadow work is very interesting to me because I'm kind of thinking, unseen forces operating, and motivating and affecting me. It seems to be that I should be aware of all these. I should be aware of these unseen forces. I should know what's happening and why I do what I do and why people do what they do. I've been involved in sort of the seeking, the study of the mind and spirituality and all these things since I was a kid, and really, still fascinated by it, thoroughly fascinated by it, and what people have to say in the different traditions and so forth. So, the reason why this is relevant, in the 12-step Buddhist, obviously, I introduced the idea of the aspects of self. Don't put them on the shelf. And speaking in the first person as, I'm the voice of anger, I'm the voice of greed, I'm the voice of the addict. We all do that. Hey, I'm Darren, I'm an addict. We say that in meetings. So we're already doing that. We're already owning that. The thing is, in recovery, we kind of overdo it. We think, I am an addict. We sort of over-identify. In other words, it becomes our entire identity. And it makes sense in the beginning of recovery because we really need to kind of counter the denial and the lies and the defensiveness and the rationalization and justification of participating and continuing to perpetuate the addiction, all of it, right? And So we've really got to hit that hard by saying, yes, I'm an addict, and that's what this means is I'm powerless over my addiction, and my life is becoming manageable, right? So it makes sense to identify as an addict, but when you've been sober for a while, it makes sense to also develop some other branches, some other leaves, some other buds and sprouts, right? Sorry, I don't mean to trigger my pothead friends out there. I'm still, pot's still my drug of choice, so I'm also triggered by medical marijuana and all, pot stores everywhere and all this, people smoking it and this kind of thing. But triggers are a big part of it as well. Just as sort of as not really an aside. I mean, it's really relevant to the topic of shadow work, the topic of esoterics and triggers really relate to something else that I'm really studying a lot of, which is trauma, addiction as trauma, and spiritual bypassing, which I can spend a lot of time on. And actually, in the book I'm working on now, it's really going to deal a lot with this topic. But going back to the aspects and in how it works, to over-identify, like we have one, and we lock into it, and with the power of practice, with the power of meditation and 12-step work, psychotherapy, and art therapy, creative expression, ecstatic dance, whatever you do, whatever you can do, whatever we can do, right? It kind of unearths these. It unlocks the energy, really. I mean, I've become an energy healer since I talked to you last. I mean, I don't do a lot of it, formally, but I've got my Reiki 3 levels and some Peruvian shamanistic stuff I've worked on and received initiations and training in for a couple of years. So I'm really, and also with the yoga and with the Anu yoga, the Tibetan system, and the Yantra yoga, the Tibetan system, and the Hatha yoga that I teach and practice. I mean, this energy thing is really huge now in my life and in my awareness. So, understanding how energy works, and that's a sound too. People use these words. Oh, it's energy. But to be kind of grounded with it, the energy of the archetype, that force, that voice. The energy is just under the surface, right? And it's really the power of our awareness. If we do some meditation, so there's a couple of ways of looking at it. If we do meditation and we just sit still and be present and allow what arises to arise, then, stuff comes up and stuff happens and we process and eventually maybe discover something and maybe, we can evolve a little bit. But if we do it with some sort of intention, like I am the voice of anger and my job is to, fuck shit up, my job is to, get my way and stop those things from happening, and whatever the voice of anger wants to say, and I'm the voice of kindness, and my job is to care, and my job is to be gentle. If you just even speak in those voices, if you even just do that like I just did, and obviously we do this on the retreats and in the workshops, and we can get a lot more into it, but just writing it or speaking it opens the energy. It opens the energy and the awareness. If we learn to be aware on subtle levels of the deeper energies, we can really evolve just from that practice. I mean, a lot. So the esoterics is, these are the sciences or the systems, I should say, which, are beneath the surface. And we have our surface level of our awareness of our physical dimension. Obviously, we can see our body. That's the surface level. We've got our energy, which we can't even see, right? And we've got our mind, which really tricky to see the mind. So we practice and study, we practice meditation. We try to become aware of these things. But most of the traditions, most of the sort of what we call the sutra traditions in Buddhism don't really address energy. They don't really talk about or give explanations. Buddha didn't really talk on that level. I mean, he did, but not directly. It's sort of like you can get that if you read the sutras, but in other systems, things have been discussed more openly and in much more detail with really systematic, detailed explanations and practices, methods, and so forth. So it's cool to be aware of this stuff and to be able to address it and work with it. So, just the idea of working with the shadow, something I've been down with since, mid-'80s, getting into some books on Carl Jung and so forth. And who knows? I mean, Carl Jung's probably the person responsible for everything like that I think about in terms of shadows, and probably responsible for so much of our thinking in terms of what we've learned in the 12 steps, and just a lot of the, current thinking, I think, is just the result of his own personal work, his own genius, right? So that's kind of what I'm thinking about, just in terms of what I'd like to introduce to you about this book, The Power of Vow, is that this book is about taking vows, and really thinking in detail. It's really a meditation, a practice, a study on what is a vow. It's easy to just say the words, and it's easy to think we're doing it, and so on, but we should get a context, and we understand what vows are, what they're not, what they are in a secular sense. I talk a lot about integration, a lot about dogma, and people that are anti-dogma, different types of teachers that are presenting themselves out there in certain ways, and so forth. What vows are in the context of refuge, taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, and the lay vows, and the Bodhisattva vows, and a little bit about the tantric vows, but I'm not going into detail on that. I mean, this book's already over 300 pages, and anyways, we've got a lot to talk about just in that. So in the book, we do a lot of this workbook stuff in the printed version, that is. The ebook, $3.99 on Amazon. The audiobook's available, just came out, also on Amazon and Audible. But this printed book, and I have to thank Tysa for this idea. She said, why don't you make it a workbook? And she's really been bugging me to make a workbook for a long time. So I decided to go into this ebook and add these sections where you can reflect on your own thoughts. So, I mean, they're easy to remember things that are in big call-out quotes on every few pages. For example, page 116, the only revolution that needs to happen is the one on the inside. Now, these are memorable things that you can quote, you can tweet, you can talk about in meetings, you can meditate on, something that you can draw out of it. And you have information overload. It's easy to see something like this. So calling those things out, I tried to be meticulous in what I selected for those. But this idea of reflections, so we have here at page 117, reflections. If you're an addict in recovery, how have your addicted patterns continued even though you're clean? There's a few lines on there, and obviously you can write and talk and process on that forever, right? But it's just a place where you can jot a few notes down. So I designed this printed version as a workbook and practice guide. One of the biggest questions that I've had over the years is, how do I start a practice? So we have a little bit of, we have a sample practice, and you can kind of mix and match modules of the practice in there. It includes, meditation, how to take refuge, how to do purification, and by the time you get to the end of the book, you've understood these basic Buddhist topics like karma and impermanence and samsara and the nature of suffering and so on. And we explore these all the way through. We explore it with shadow work and so on. And some purification for as we go, cleaning up our act, so to speak. So I feel like I'm very impressed, I'm very proud of it, and I did this one all myself. I didn't use a traditional publisher, so it's really been labor intensive. I'd love it if you'd go into your local bookstore and say, hey, I heard that the author of the 12-Step Buddhist has a new book. Can you carry it, please? But you can get it on Amazon. And it's nice, though, and everybody can get that. All the bookstores can get that through their Ingram distributor, so it would be awesome to have your support out there. And that's a little bit about that. We're about to do the 12-Step Buddhist, what is it? It's like the 5th or 6th. I think it's the 5th. Well, I get confused on the numbers because we've been doing the winter retreats longer. So this is the 3rd annual summer retreat at Brighton Bush, and then we've got the 5th or 6th winter retreat coming up in January, if you want to catch that. I'm going to be moving these retreats down south. I'm going to be heading to San Diego myself to get into the sunshine and the daylight and bid farewell to the rain and cold and wet of Portland. After a dozen years, I'm over it. So I'm really excited about moving down to San Diego. And I'm going to leave you with that right now. That's 20 minutes. That's about as much as our attention spans hold these days. Just wanted you to know that the new book is out, and I'm really excited to be doing a podcast on the phone. I apologize if it's not as awesome sound as you're used to, but I'll work on it. And if it turns out that it really doesn't work, hey, I'll go back to the mic. I've got all the gear set up and everything. It's just a little bit more time consuming. But I think that's all to the good, and hope you guys are all out there doing well, staying clean, working your programs, and doing your meditation. More power to you, and apply the power of vow to it and take it to a deeper level. Peace out. We'll talk soon.